A 230-ton Boeing 777 is not a needle in a haystack. It is a city in the sky. It is a masterpiece of modern engineering, equipped with redundant communication systems, GPS trackers, and satellite links designed to make it impossible to lose. Yet, on the night of March 8th, 2014, Malaysia Airlines, Flight 370, didn't just crash. It didn't just malfunction. It bypassed every safeguard of the 21st century and simply ceased to exist in our shared reality. We live in an era of total surveillance, where a smartphone can be traced to a street corner and a credit card swipe is logged in milliseconds. But MH370 proved that the world is still vast, dark, and terrifyingly capable of swallowing the monumental without leaving a ripple. For 40 minutes, it was a routine, red-eye flight filled with sleeping passengers and the soft hum of GE90 engines. Then, in the span of a single heartbeat between two air traffic control zones, the digital heartbeat of the aircraft flatlined. What followed was not a tragedy of errors, but a tactical masterpiece of evasion. This was a ghost flight that outran the reach of human eyes, leaving behind only a trail of electronic pings that whispered a story of a 7-hour journey into the most remote abyss on Earth. To understand how 239 people could vanish in the age of the internet, we have to look past the headlines and into the cold, forensic data of the blind spots where the physical world ends and the mystery begins. The evening began with deceptive normalcy at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Flight 370 was scheduled for a 12:35 a.m. departure, bound for Beijing. It was a clear night. The aircraft was in peak mechanical condition, and at the controls was Captain Zaharia Ahmad Shah, a veteran with over 18,000 flight hours, accompanied by his young first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid. At 12:41 a.m., the wheels left the tarmac. For the next 38 minutes, the flight was textbook. It climbed to its assigned altitude of 35,000 feet, following the standard airway toward the South China Sea. At 1:01 a.m., Captain Zahari radioed to confirm their level. Everything was calm. At 1:08 a.m., the plane passed the last waypoint in Malaysian airspace. Then came the moment that would haunt aviation history forever. At 1:19 a.m., as the jet approached the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese air traffic control, a voice, presumed to be the captain's, delivered the final transmission. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was a standard handoff delivered with absolute composure. But as the plane crossed into the dead zone between the two jurisdictions, the unthinkable happened. At 1:21 a.m., the aircraft's transponder was manually switched off. On the screens of civilian controllers, the icon for MH370 didn't flicker or show an emergency code. It simply vanished. While civilian radar saw nothing but empty sky, military primary radar, which detects physical objects regardless of their transponders, was recording a terrifying deviation. Almost immediately after the good night call, the Boeing 777 performed a sharp, aggressive bank to the left. This wasn't a mechanical drift. It was a hard, tactical turn. The aircraft doubled back on its path, crossing over the Malay Peninsula. It was flying in the dark, silent and invisible to the civilian world. Most chillingly, the radar data suggests the plane zigzagged along the borders of flight information regions. By hugging these boundaries, the pilot ensured that neither country's controllers would take responsibility for the unidentified blip. as each would assume it belonged to the other. This was the work of someone who understood the architecture of the sky, someone who knew exactly where the cracks in the system were. As the plane reached the Andaman Sea, it turned northwest, following a path toward the Bay of Bengal, before performing one final, long-range turn toward the south. At this point, the primary radar range was exhausted. The physical world had lost sight of MH370. But the aircraft had a secret. Even with its transponders and ACARS systems disabled, a small terminal on top of the fuselage continued to attempt a connection with a satellite owned by the British company Inmarsat. These were the pings, simple electronic handshakes that occurred once an hour. These pings contained no GPS data, no altitude, and no voice. They were merely the aircraft saying, "I am still here." For years, scientists and investigators pored over these 7 signals, using a breakthrough forensic technique called Doppler shift analysis. By measuring the slight distortion in the frequency of the pings caused by the plane's movement relative to the satellite, they were able to calculate 2 potential paths, a northern arc toward Central Asia and a southern arc toward the Antarctic. The northern path was quickly discarded. It would have required the plane to fly through the most heavily guarded airspaces in the world without being intercepted. That left only the southern arc, a desolate 7-hour journey into the screaming 60s of the Indian Ocean. The data revealed a flight of cold, mechanical precision. For hours, the plane flew a straight line at a constant speed, suggesting it was on autopilot. But how could a crew stay silent for 7 hours? One of the most harrowing theories involves a deliberate depressurization of the cabin. By climbing to 45,000 feet, far above the 777's normal operating limit, the person at the controls could have activated the outflow valves, vacuuming the oxygen out of the cabin. While the pilot had access to a high-pressure oxygen mask that could last for hours, the passengers' drop-down masks would only provide 15 minutes of air. In the thin, freezing atmosphere at that height, the passengers and cabin crew would have succumbed to hypoxia within minutes, drifting into a permanent sleep. The plane would have become a ghost ship, a pressurized tomb flying silently over the dark waters, fueled by the steady pulse of its engines until the very last drop of kerosene was spent. The 7th and final ping occurred at 8:19 a.m. It was a log-on request, a sign that the engines had finally flamed out, causing the onboard power to flicker before the emergency generator kicked in. Forensic flight simulations suggest that once the fuel was gone, the autopilot would have disconnected. Without human intervention, a Boeing 777 in a dead-stick state enters a series of violent phugoid oscillations, climbing and diving until it loses stability. The final descent would have been a terrifying, high-speed spiral. The aircraft likely struck the water not as a whole, but as a shattered cloud of debris, impacting at hundreds of miles per hour. The 7th arc, the region where the pings terminated, became the focus of the largest and most expensive search in human history. For years, specialized vessels mapped the ocean floor, revealing underwater mountains and canyons that had never been seen by human eyes. Yet the main wreckage remained a ghost. The first physical proof of the tragedy didn't come from the search ships, but from the ocean itself. In July 2015, a piece of a wing, a flaperon, was found washed up on the shores of Réunion Island, thousands of miles from the search zone. Since then, dozens of fragments have been recovered from the coastlines, of Madagascar, Mozambique, and South Africa. These pieces of honeycombed carbon fiber tell a grim story. Experts who analyzed the flaperon noted that it was in a retracted position at the time of impact, suggesting the plane was not configured for a controlled ditching or a landing on water. It was a high-energy crash. The ocean had spent a year and a half grinding the aircraft into fragments and scattering them across the southern hemisphere. But even as the debris appeared, the why remained as elusive as ever. The investigation into the crew turned up a disturbing piece of evidence. In Captain Zahari's home, police found a sophisticated flight simulator. When the FBI recovered deleted data from the hard drives, they found a flight path that mirrored the final journey of MH370, a departure from Kuala Lumpur, a turn across the peninsula, and a long haul into the southern Indian Ocean, ending in fuel exhaustion. It wasn't proof of guilt, but it was a haunting coincidence that many believe points to a murder twist on a grand scale. Yet his friends and family describe him as a kind, professional man, with no history of mental illness or extremist ties. Why would a man who loved flying destroy the very thing he lived for? If it wasn't the pilot, was it a sophisticated hijack? A mechanical failure that coincidentally disabled all communications while leaving the autopilot intact? Every theory has a flaw. Every explanation leaves a crack wide enough for doubt to seep in. As we stand years removed from that March night, MH370 has transitioned from a news event into a modern legend, a digital haunting that refuses to be exorcised. The search has been suspended, the families have been left in a state of ambiguous loss, and the deep sea floor remains silent. We are forced to confront a reality we thought we had evolved past, that for all our satellites, our cables, and our global reach, the Earth is still capable of keeping a secret. The southern Indian Ocean is a place of primordial violence, where waves the size of buildings crash in perpetual darkness. It is a graveyard of secrets. The disappearance of Flight 370 isn't just about a missing plane. It's about the fragility of our perceived control. It is the story of a man-made giant that walked off the edge of the map and into the blind spot of history. We search for the black boxes not just to find the truth of a crash, but to reassure ourselves that we cannot truly be lost. But as long as the seventh arc remains empty, MH370 stands as a monument to the unknown. It is a reminder that in the vast, liminal space between the stars and the sea, there are shadows that even the brightest lights cannot reach. The truth is down there, locked in a rusted orange box 5 miles deep, waiting for a day when our reach finally matches our curiosity. Until then, the ghost of 370 continues its flight, forever suspended in the moment, between the last good night and the final silence.